I've met you before at a couple of different conferences.
Right.
Contact in the Desert. Also, I just came out with a new book called Making Contact that
I see that. Yeah.
I'd love to, I'll send you a copy or a PDF of that. And
Cool.
if you like it, write a blurb on Amazon
Okay.
because your lineage, shall we say, was the beginning of it all, the modern day understanding of the UFO phenomena. This is Paul Hynek is the son of J. Allen Hynek, the guy who put together the close encounter categories, close encounters of the first kind, second, third. Of course, now it's gone to fourth, fifth, and sixth. So, how much were you aware of your father's work as you were growing up, and were you interested in UFOs?
Yeah. So, yes, I was aware. I don't remember life without UFOs. We had flying saucer ornaments on the Christmas tree. It was part of the fabric of our lives. So I was always aware of it. And my interest level varied. It sort of ebbed and flowed. I think when you are just handed something on a silver platter, you don't always value it because it's just there. You don't have to do anything. It's like speaking your native language, right? I can just sit here and English washes over me and I understand everything. But when I'm, rocking in Spanish or Japanese, I have to get the keywords and all that. So I was always interested in UFOs and science in general because it's hard not to be interested when you are exposed to sort of the cherries on top of the ice cream regularly. So there are 5 kids in our family, and we're all interested, and we all have pretty much the same attitude as my father did.
But just to go a little backstory of your father, he was an astronomer in Chicago, I think Northwestern University, and he wasn't always interested in UFOs. Actually, I liked you to describe that moment where it goes from swamp gas to, oh my God, because, he's always said he's been embarrassed about the swamp gas thing, but where did so he was hired by, I guess it was Project Blue Book, to debunk the whole UFO phenomena. And then, of course, he sees this lights in this swamp and he says, oh, that's swamp. Yeah. What was that moment? Because I don't think it was in the Blue Book series, that moment where he goes, oh my God, this is real. So talk about he didn't believe it at all. And then so yeah, that progression, I've never really heard the specifics of that.
Right. So you're right. He was, as were most mainstream astronomers in the 40s and 50s, didn't think much of the flying saucer phenomenon.
Right.
I don't think scientists use the word belief so much. It's really about whether they accept the weight of the data. But yeah, he didn't think there was anything to it. And I'm pretty sure that when the Air Force approached him in the late 40s to help them explain things, he probably thought it was a couple weekends worth of work at best. I'm sure he had no idea that his 4th born child would be sitting here talking to you guys some 60, 70 years, 80 years later about this stuff.
Right.
So he didn't think there was anything to it. Project Blue Book was not a serious scientific inquiry. It's just to tamp down public hysteria.
Right.
And my father once likened it to the Society for the Explanation of the Uninvestigated.
Right. That was Bud Hopkins' favorite sort of phrase, was like the role of science is to investigate the unexplained instead of to explain the uninvestigated. So yeah.
That's right. And so but he had a front row seat to.
But he was hired by Blue Book, right? Wasn't he?
Yeah, for 20 years, he was the official technical scientific consultant for Project Blue Book. And again, not a serious, especially after 1953, not a serious scientific effort. And for him,
wait, just want to back up. After 53, but there was those sightings in 51 over the Capitol. I mean,
52, right. The Washington, D.C. flap. Yeah, which are well documented. It's one of the best cases that's ever happened where President Truman actually scrambled fighter jets into the air because there were these ships going over Washington, D.C.
Right. No,
and
yeah. No, I just want to read one quote by Truman from April 4th, 1950. He said, "I can assure you that flying saucers, given that they exist, are not constructed by any power on Earth." So there it was, right out. But then what happened? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1953, there was what they called the Robertson Panel, which was there are two events that Project Blue Book had: the Robertson Panel in 1953 and the Condon Committee in 1969, which basically shut down Blue Book. And they were both attempts to have sort of cover fire from academics so that they could say, nothing to see here, folks, please disperse. And in 1953, Project Blue Book became that much more PR based, and the Air Intelligence Service Squadron really picked up the reins of serious scientific investigation, going after like crash retrievals and things like that. And so my father, it was really kind of like the frog in hot water, getting more and more exposed. And by the time 1964 came and there was the Lonnie Zamora case in Socorro, New Mexico, I think it was, in addition to the fact that it was a very compelling case. You have an on-duty policeman, very sober, very earnest, who didn't want any part of this, and other evidence to go with it. But there's also the accumulated evidence that happened before that was, in Jacques Vallée's words, a real turning point for my father. And I actually had the pleasure of going to Socorro with Jacques about 2 months ago.
What was the accumulation? So he, like most scientists, didn't believe, like most scientists today, didn't believe any, but what was the accumulating evidence, and what was that moment of awakening?
Well, if there's a singular moment, it would be 1964. But by that point, he'd already seen so much. For a scientist, it's not really about one case. It's about patterns that you tease out of the data. And when you see umpteen cases that pass through all the screening, they're not Jupiter, they're not Venus, they're not a Frisbee, and all these other things, and you see what he would call highly credible witnesses, Air Force pilots, for example. So he thought it was kind of hypocritical for the Air Force to deny the reports of their own trained employees.
Right.
And you have enough of these over time, and there are certain things that emerge that are commonalities that the individual witnesses wouldn't have known about in other cases. You really have to say, you know what, this inconvenient set of data doesn't fit with the grant I'm going for or my beliefs, but I can't really just, brush it under the carpet anymore. So he started to really look at it in earnest. And like I said, I don't think he believed in it, but he accepted that there was a phenomena. Now, that's a far cry from saying it's extraterrestrial or what the provenance might be, but he was convinced that all the evidence, the credible witnesses, the radar, the films that he saw indicated that there definitely was a bona fide.
His speech at the UN, I think it was the UN, or maybe it's from Congress.
Yeah, in 73.
Right. That is a powerful talk about levels of reality. And, it's more than, so talk about that moment, because that I would love everyone to hear what he has to say there. I can't find it now, but talk about what he says there.
So it really was a watershed moment. Jacques and my dad, Lee Spiegel, spoke to the United Nations, sponsored by Guyana, I think. Mm-hmm. And spoke about not only that there is a phenomenon and some evidence, but then sort of went in the deeper end about where they may come from. Yeah. And one of the things that I don't think is news to anybody watching here is that the UFO phenomena does not seem to be encapsulated in entirety by the idea of nuts and bolts craft coming from other planets.
Right.
For many people who report an encounter, and we call them experiencers, we don't call them witnesses. And there's a reason for that, because the sighting of a craft in the sky is as often as not the signal or not the single most important aspect of that experience for people. There's many, many reports, as we know, of communication before, during, and after the visual sighting, and a feeling of, deep level communication. Then you have the fact that so many of these things, sometimes captured on film, exhibit behaviors that aren't consistent with our known understanding of physics. Right. So he talked about how the extraterrestrial hypothesis, as foreign and exotic as it may seem to some, isn't foreign and exotic enough to really capture the whole phenomena. And, also there's, well, I won't delve into that, but things like perhaps interdimensional travel or even time travel, they are not, you can't really rule them off the table. I mean, this is one of the most enigmatic phenomena around. And my sense that I got in part from my father is that it's a multivariate explanation. I think there could well be extraterrestrial components, but that's not only that. And Jacques once said, look, when the dust settles, if the UFO experience phenomena is explained only by extraterrestrials, I'm going to be bored.
Yeah. No, I love that line. I think that's a great line. And what you just said, and we can get into that in a little bit, is the reason I think the Pentagon and also the UK Ministry of Defense have relabeled the phenomena from UFOs to UAPs. It's sort of a hint that it's not objects, it's phenomena, and they're two different categories altogether. From object, yeah.
That's a good point, Alan, because they are rebranding. And people don't rebrand things when they don't care about them or they don't have editorial schedules, right? You do that in front of a launch, and people talk about disclosure. We've already had a lot of disclosure. And I think even if we do have that signal event of a ship landing on the White House lawn, a lot of people won't believe that anymore. And if we do have even more white hot disclosure moments, many people will say it's about time, as opposed to, oh my God, they're real.
Right. Well, before we get into disclosure a little more, I just want to go back to the swamp gas because.
Okay, end closure. Okay.
Yeah, no, right. Just one more thing, because it's still being used. I'm sorry that your father had regretted that whole thing, but talk about the swamp gas moment, because.
Okay, so it was like Hillsdale, Michigan, 1966. And there were a variety of sightings, but the ones that are most notorious were girls in a dormitory looking out over sort of a brackish area, seeing some lights and objects in the sky. And at the press conference, footage of which I've recently seen, by the way, my father described part of the phenomena as perhaps optical distortions caused by swamp gas. And, the press ran with that. It's not always helpful in the media to say, hey, this doesn't represent the whole thing. It's swamp gas. Hynek says swamp gas. And so that went well beyond what he had intended. And he, like you said, he's very regretful. And if we ever wanted to get my dad riled up, we just said swamp gas, right? It was sort of a cheat code to piss off the old man. And it's when he realized not so much about believing the phenomena or accepting the phenomena, but of the import of his words and how he was perceived. And that led to a lot of really soul-searching conversations with a lot of Jacques and many others. And one of the things that happened was that the local congressman in Michigan got really angry that he felt his constituents had been dissed by this, Pentagon consultant. So he wrote a letter saying we need to have a committee to investigate this, and that became the Condon Committee. And that local congressman was Gerald Ford, who became president.
Right. It's interesting. Gerald Ford was really interested in the whole UFO phenomenon before he became president. Once he was president, you didn't hear anything about it. Do you know why that was?
Well, we hear all these stories of presidents saying, hey, I wanted to find out, and I was told there's nothing there. Right. And something that I learned recently, which I didn't know, is that there are really 3 different categories of classification. And 2 of them that are germane here are like the White House and CIA and NSA. And you have, secret, top secret, super duper top secret, and all that. And that's what the president has some access to. But then the nuclear side has a completely different classification system of P, Q, and R. And why that's important is if you go back to the 1940s in New Mexico, Roswell, and there's a new case, a case that's being talked about now that happened in San Antonio, Texas, or San Antonio, New Mexico, just south of Socorro in 1945, which is the subject of a new book out called Trinity by Jacques Vallée and Paula Harris.
Right.
And so you had a lot of these sightings around the White Sands nuclear missile testing range. So and there was reports in San Antonio of a crashed saucer being hauled away. Now, that was under the purview of the then Atomic Energy Commission. So they would have scooped up any evidence, any crafts, any beings, whatnot, that was around their facilities. And they would have kept that, and they are under mandate not to release that to anybody. So the successor agency to the Atomic Energy Commission is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So they have whatever evidence they collected, they have, and the president simply has no access to that. Right. So presidents can be very interested, but they can be rebuffed for a variety of reasons. And one of them is that there's a whole bucket of security and confidential information that no matter how much the president has interest, they're not going to get access to.
Well, that goes to the central point that we're dealing with now as disclosure, or whatever we want to call this thing that's coming out in June, which has really repressed 75 years, or since 45, or maybe 41.
Yeah, right.
Well, first, what would your father say about the progress we're at now? And who do you think is holding the cards? But anyway, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I think my father would be thrilled. I mean, contrast the official stance in his day of the Air Force saying, we got this, there's nothing there. You don't really believe in little green men with ray guns, do you? So the Navy now is saying, yeah, we've seen hundreds of these. We've got gun camera footage. We've got radar corroboration. We have hundreds of seamen seeing them on the craft with high-powered binoculars and naked eyes. And we see these all the time. We don't know what they are. And frankly, we're a little concerned for our aviators. Right. Can you help us out? That is 180 degrees different from the Air Force of my father's day. Now, who's playing the cards you mentioned?
Yeah.
We have a tendency to think of the government as this one big monolithic entity working coherently. There are all these turf battles. I mentioned the Air Intelligence Service Squadron. That's where I think the Men in Black came from. And that was working at cross purposes with Project Blue Book down the hall, for whom my father was employed. So the Navy has a different stance. And to me, I think in part it's because the Air Force is their job to, exert threat through the air, but to protect us against threat through the air, and to create the perception that we are protected from, expressions of force through the air. So for the Air Force to say, oh, there's all these UFOs, we don't know what to do, that strikes at their central mission. The Navy, the water is their domain, and they tangentially patrol the air, but it's not a big concession for them to say, oh, by the way, there's these things in the air, we don't know what to do. Now, they weren't completely willing to do this, and my friend Chris Mellon and others helped kind of force the hand that's playing the cards to do this, but we see this steady drumbeat, and to me and others, disclosure really started in October, November 2017, when the New York Times, the newspaper of record, who had historically poo-pooed UFOs, published these Pentagon accounts of the Tic Tac and other sightings. So you now have official organs of the United States government saying, yep, oh, and by the way, that video is legitimate too. We don't know what it is, and we're still scared for our aviators.
But what about you? You skipped over the whole MJ-12 Majestic. Was that a reality? I mean, there's a lot of mythologies around all this. Weren't there those central people, and I don't know, in control of the secret?
I have no idea.
Okay. I don't know either.
I've heard so much on both sides from people that I believe and are very credible. I just don't know.
But
let's say it's instead of Majestic 12, let's settle on Pretty Cool 6. I
don't know. There's all these documents by Robert Woods with type, and it seems like more than, yes, of course, it seems like the Navy and the Air Force have their different agendas, but behind all that, there seems to be one central, it seems that way, I don't know, controlling factor, and maybe that is in conflict now. One, not person, but one deep, I hate to use the word deep state because I don't even believe in it, but let's say one deep below, what Clinton said, well, I asked about UFOs and my people said there wasn't anything. And then he says, well, maybe there are career people in business in line who just don't give me the information. He says that.
Sure.
And, Obama's saying, he just said it the other day, well, seriously, there are things we can't explain, but I really can't talk to about aliens. So
right.
So someone is telling these guys, presidents, and not that they're running the show, but what to say and what not to say. Who is that?
I have no idea. Next question. No idea. Next question.
Okay. I mean, I'm just wondering. No, I'm not saying, but so what was your father's idea? I mean, he said, yes, there's this phenomena. Did he ever mention the A word, aliens? Does he ever speculate? Well, what did he think? Not that, I mean, what was his, was his hypothesis about who was driving these ships and where they came from and what they were?
Okay. So, he would sort of, in a conversation, he would kind of separate his confidence that the phenomena of UFOs was real. And he didn't study UFOs, he studied UFO reports. That's what gave him the insight to make the Close Encounters classification system. But of course, as any individual would be, he was curious and wondered where they came from. And I mentioned that, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, as sort of nice as it is, doesn't really seem to encompass all of it. So he thought a lot about, and another thing he thought about was, he would say that if you liken the continental United States to, or the size of the known visible universe to like the continental United States, we are less than a speck of dust in Kansas. So first of all, how do aliens from other planets even find us? Yes, we've been beaming episodes of I Love Lucy out into the ether for these many decades, but still it's a non-trivial thing just to find us. Then if they find us, why do they care? If they can come here in a craft, they've had a technological singularity, they got everything they need. They don't need gold, they don't need water. I don't think they're interested in our concept of human love. And I don't really think they'd be interested much in our nuclear capabilities one way or the other. I don't understand that. Plus, we have very sensitive instruments to detect objects entering and leaving our atmosphere, and they exhibit comfort with our Earth gravity and atmosphere, et cetera. So for me and my father, the extraterrestrial hypothesis just doesn't really work that well. So interdimensional, for me, answers the two thorniest questions right off the bat. How do they know we're here? Well, they are us, prime. They're right next to us. How do they get here? Okay, some kind of wormhole. It's not, a 30,000 light year trip through radiation-filled universe. And why would they care? Well, they're our cousins, let's say. So that answers the most vexing questions of all. And it could also explain why we have this kind of Cheshire cat phenomena where you see the ship here and it's gone and it's here. Okay, are they blinking in and out of the dimension?
Yeah.
So he liked that quite a lot. And, although he was a nuts and bolts astrophysicist, he was a Rosicrucian at heart. So he had spiritual beliefs. And for him, an interdimensional hypothesis just seemed to ring true for some aspects. It doesn't mean there aren't crafts from, Zeta Reticuli, or it doesn't mean that, the things that we see could be manifestations, remote manifestations from another planet too. There's all sorts of twists and turns on the theme, but he was adamant in thinking that, one of the phrases that I really like is that there are some who prefer questions they can't answer, and others like answers they don't question. Right. And here, like me, I'm not a religious person. Someone asked me, how is the universe created? No idea. And I'm perfectly comfortable leaving it at that. So my father felt in science and in UFOs in particular, leave the door open to the possibility of the phenomena. But once you decide there really is a phenomena here, don't settle for grabbing the best available answer and shoving it in. Keep your mind open after you decide there's a phenomena that maybe you don't know the answer, as frustrating as it may be. So for him, it wasn't so much where do they come from as it was where don't they come from in entirety.
No, I really think that's such an important point because obviously, as Jacques Vallée said, there's more than going on than little green men visiting us from some other place. There's too much synchronicities and strangeness. So, I mean, it comes down to, could it be that we have been not heard the truth because the government doesn't understand it? They don't know how to tell us. We don't know what's going on. Could that be behind the cover up?
Yeah, in Project Blue Book, the TV show that you mentioned, I became friends with the cast, and it's not super creepy at all to have the super villain from Game of Thrones play your TV father, just for the record. I talked to the guys that played the generals, and one of them liked my father. He read about my father when he's in college, and loved the UFO phenomena. But he was playing that general not as a bad guy, but playing him as somebody who is safeguarding the fabric of the fraught and perilous and tender fabric of national security. So for him, and I talked about this with him in the context of the show, if my father goes off the reservation too much, he could easily have my father killed and sleep easily that night and play with his children because he has saved the United States from an internal threat. Right. So the government, if you're in possession of these top secrets, you can easily understand how you personally could become cultured to the point where you say, I can't release this information. Our enemies on the other side of the ocean can benefit from it, and it could lead to chaos, complete breakdown in society. And we don't have a computer model that can adequately predict this. So I don't begrudge the government, should they have deep, dark secrets, from keeping them deep, dark secrets, because it's a real wild card as to what could happen. And then maybe they are reverse engineering propulsion systems, et cetera. But it's a real risky proposition. And then, like I said, if they do decide to go full out disclosure, open kimono, what percentage of people simply won't believe them anymore? Disclosure is a much more tricky, challenging business than it used to be when we thought about a flying saucer landing on the lawn of the White House and Walter Cronkite narrating the event.
So just to wrap up, because they want us to wrap, although I can talk to you for hours, I just want to know what do you think? What's your line of interest? Are you just fulfilling your father's legacy? Or do you have your own personal interest in this? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I can't fill his shoes, even though my cloddy feet are a little bit bigger. My interest really is the interdimensional angle. And, my father was a scientist, and he had to be sort of measured in what he said. I'm not a scientist, so I can freely say I'm interested in the intersection between DMT and UFOs. Mm-hmm. I think it's fascinating. And so that's what I'm doing personal investigation into, and trying to see if I can make a bridge between those two communities, because they're just, my spidey sense just tells me there's something there.
Well, actually, you're going to be at Contact in the Desert. Anthony Peake, I think, is talking about that intersection as well between DMT. Have you talked to Anthony Peake about that?
Not Anthony Peake, but I'm very interested in the work of Andrew Gallimore as well.
Well, maybe it was Andrew Gallimore that was talking.
Yeah, alien information theory.
Right. Yeah. So it's a brave new world we are entering, it seems like, isn't it?
It is. And, no matter where we are in the spectrum, I think we're all kind of front-ended in this audience on the spectrum of UFO acceptance / belief. Mm-hmm. It's gratifying to see this increasing drumbeat of lowercase d disclosures from various organs of the government and, heretofore skeptical organs in the media.
Right. No, it's very exciting. Thank you, Paul, for your time and interest and your willingness to go deep into what the truth is and sharing with people. I really appreciate you and your father and all the work. And I'm going to send you a PDF of my book. So